Καλησπέρα σας για τη γυραιά Ήπειρο. Καλημέρα σας για τον νέο κόσμο. Engineering a better world for all humanity. Φαίνεται ότι ο Γιάννης Υortsos έχει κάτι πολύ σημαντικό να μοιραστεί μαζί μας σήμερα και ελπίζω αυτό να φτάσει στα αυτιά και να διεγείρει κυρίως τους νέους μηχανικούς, τους φοιτητές μας, τους ερευνητές. Αλλά όχι μόνο αυτούς, αλλά και όσους εξημών, δασκάλους και θεσμικούς σε θέση ακαδημαϊκής ευθύνης αναλαμβάνουμε να σχεδιάζουμε, να υλοποιούμε και να εξυγχρονίζουμε προγράμματα σπουδών και κυρίως να επαναπροσδιορίζουμε εκπαιδευτικές προτεραιότητες και επίσης να μετράμε αποστάσεις από στόχους που πρέπει να ορίζουμε με επίγνωση διεθνών εξελίξεων, με τόλμη, διορατικότητα, ευθύνη, ακόμη και διακινδύνευση. Αγαπητέ Γιάννη Υortso, χαίρομαι που σε υποδέχομαι σε αυτή τη διαδικτυακή σύνδεση, εκπροσωπώντας την alma mater σου και σε ευχαριστώ για τη διαθεσιμότητα και εκ προημίου για όσα θα μας πεις. Σε ευχαριστώ όμως και εκ μέρους των Πρυτανικών και Κοσμητορικών αρχών της Πολυτεχνικής Ακαδημαϊκής Κοινότητας της χώρας, μια και όλοι εμείς, όπως έχω ενημερώσει, Πρυτάνες Πολυτεχνείων και Κοσμήτορες Πολυτεχνικών Σχολών των Πανεπιστημίων, συνεννοηθήκαμε να εκπαιμφθεί η ομιλία στους κοινότητές μας. Συνεννοηθήκαμε όλοι, εν συνόλο 12. Ο Πρύτανης του Πολυτεχνείου Κρήτης, Βαγγέλης Διαμαντόπουλος, και οι Κοσμήτορες των Πολυτεχνικών Σχολών Αριστοτέλειου Πανεπιστήμιου Θεσσαλονίκης, Κύρος Ιάκυνθος, Πάτρας, Νίκος Αβούρης, Δυτικής Αττικής, Γιώργος Ιωαννίδης, Θεσσαλίας, Γιώργος Σταμούλης, Ιωαννίνων, Βασίλης Δημακόπουλος, Δημοκρίτιου, Χρήστος Καραγιάννης, Δυτικής Μακεδονίας, Θανάσης Τριανταφύλου, Αιγαίου, Πέτρος Καβάσαλης, Πελοποννήσου, Αγγελική Παπαλού και Ελληνικού Μεσογείου Πανεπιστημίου, Μανώλης Καραπηδάκης. Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, ο Γιάννης Υortsos είναι διπλωματούχος στη Σχολή Χημικών Μηχανικών του Εθνικού Μετσόβιου Πολυτεχνείου του έτους 1973, με διδακτορικό από το Caltech και τώρα Dean του Viterbi School of Engineering του University of Southern California και Professor of Chemical and Petroleum Engineering στο Department of Chemical Engineering and Material Science. Η ερευνητική του δραστηριότητα, μέσα στην οποία έχουν χωρέσει σημαντικές συνεργασίες με ελληνικές ερευνητικές ομάδες, είναι στην περιοχή της ροής, μεταφοράς και χημικής αντίδρασης σε πορόδι μέσα. Είναι μέλος της Εθνικής Ακαδημίας Μηχανικών των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών Αμερικής από το 2008. Δεν θα αναφερθώ παρά μόνο σε μία από τις πολλές σημαντικές διακρίσεις του, αυτήν που παραπέμπει και στη σημερινή ομιλία του. Είναι το Bernard Gordon Prize for Innovation in Engineering and Technology Education της Εθνικής Ακαδημίας Μηχανικών για το 2022. Ο λόγος της βράβευσής του, το citation, for creating an innovative education program that prepares students to become future engineering leaders who will address the National Academy of Engineering Grand Challenges. Παρακαλώ να κλείσουν τα μικρόφωνα τους συναδέλφους στο πάνελ. Σημειώνω ότι ο Γιάννης Υortsos είναι μέλος του HIAS, Hellenic Institute of Advanced Studies, που πρόσφατα συγκροτήθηκε με πρωτοβουλία διακεκριμένων επιστημόνων της ελληνικής διασποράς και αποσκοπεί στην οικοδόμηση γεφυρών συνεργασίας της διασποράς με την ελληνική επιστημονική κοινότητα. Το Εθνικό Μετσόβιο Πολυτεχνείο εκπροσωπείται στον ιδρυτικό πυρήνα του Ινστιτούτου και θα προσπαθήσει να συμβάλλει στην επίτευξη των στόχων. Ευχαριστώ όλους για τη συμμετοχή σας και τους συνεργάτες μου Γιάννη Τζιγκουνάκη για την τεχνική επιμέλεια και την Κατερίνα Μακρινού για την υποστήριξη. Σημειωτέων ότι η ομιλία αυτή μεταδίδεται με live streaming. Μετά την ομιλία θα γίνει συζήτηση μέσω του Q&A και moderation και όσοι είναι στο πάνελ μπορούν φυσικά να διατυπώσουν τις ερωτήσεις τους με αμεσότητα. Σας ευχαριστώ. Γιάννη Υortso, σε ακούμε.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ, Ανδρέα. Σας ευχαριστώ όλους που με φωνάξατε να σας παρουσιάσω μερικές ιδέες που έχουμε δημιουργήσει εδώ και αρκετά χρόνια. Σαν Dean στο Πανεπιστήμιο του University of Southern California, the Viterbi School of Engineering από το 2005 συμπληρώνω 17 χρόνια σαν dean. Προσπάθησα να συμπεράνω και να συμπυκνώσω διάφορα πράγματα σχετικά με την μηχανική και τον ρόλο τον οποίο παίζει στο μέλλον, τώρα και στο μέλλον. Για μένα είναι μεγάλη τιμή και συγκίνηση να βρίσκομαι μαζί σας. Θα ήταν πολύ καλύτερα βέβαια να ήμουν στην Ελλάδα για να ερχόμουν να σας έβλεπα εκεί. Έρχομαι συχνά, έχω μια σχέση με το Δημόκριτο, η οποία πάει πίσω πολλά χρόνια, αλλά ελπίζω σύντομα να μπορέσουμε να ξαναβρεθούμε μαζί. Θα ήθελα αυτή η ομιλία να γίνει στα αγγλικά, όχι για κανένα άλλο λόγο, αλλά διότι τα slides είναι στα αγγλικά και επίσης εάν προσπαθούσα να μιλήσω και να μεταφράσω αυτά που έχω εκεί στα slides, θα γινόταν μια πολύ περίεργη Greeklish κατάσταση και γι' αυτό το λόγο θα ήθελα να μιλήσω στα αγγλικά. Βέβαια, εάν θέλετε να μου κάνετε ερωτήσεις σε οποιαδήποτε γλώσσα, είμαι απόλυτα ικανός βέβαια να απαντήσω και στις δύο. I like to share my screen. The title of my talk will be Engineering a Better World for All Humanity. This is an idea that I have been working on for quite a while and essentially addresses some very important words here. Engineering, better, and humanity. I think engineering is obviously global and it is right now essentially the most important tool that we have to engineer a better world. What's my summary of my talk? Technology is changing exponentially fast. I will also show you some sort of a simple mathematical model that I have that shows that. It is convergent because it empowers all disciplines. Engineering has been, in some sense, considered a tool for others, but in fact, it is the discipline that empowers every other discipline. And I am much more convinced than ever before. So this exponential growth and the convergence makes it the ideal tool to be able to empower all disciplines and make a significant change in the world. As a result, there's a promise of unprecedented progress for solving big, significant problems, grand challenge type problems. At the same time, technology, because of this power that it contains the seeds of adverse and equally powerful unintended consequences. There's always unintended consequences that go together with very powerful technology. And that calls for the development of technology ethics, as well as our responsibility to be able to educate our students accordingly. Our students have to have superb technical skills because this is how technology is going. At the same time, they have to consider their impact to society. So if anything comes out of this talk is the call for our students to understand the power that they have in their hands to develop new technology, as well as the impact that it has to society. These two go together, and that requires a strong knowledge of ethical and civic responsibilities at the same time. Therefore, if we combine outstanding technical competence, which is something that we do superbly in most engineering schools in the world, combined with the buildup of character or the understanding of the technological impact to society, the two together lead to trust. And this trustworthiness is something that it is a very sorely needed in today's world, where trustworthiness is missing in many different parts, as we saw this couple of years in the areas of vaccines and all that. Together, all this will help us engineer a better world. So let me go from the beginning and start from the question, why engineering? Because, as I mentioned, is the enabled discipline of our times. It's exponentially growing and it is convergent. And I will give you a very simple definition for me for engineering technology. People ask me, can you define in a few words what's engineering or technology? And I use this very simple definition, which is encapsulated in this very simple phrase. It is leveraging phenomena for useful purposes. That's my definition of technology and engineering. It is paraphrased from a book by Brian Arthur in 2008, The Nature of Technology. And as you look at what phenomena we're leveraging, obviously in terms of the way things started in history, we started with physics, actually mechanical, if you go back to ancient Greece, for example. And then with increasing complexity, we started understanding chemistry and chemical phenomena, then perhaps geology, and more recently, obviously, biological phenomena, example, bioengineering. By leveraging phenomena, I mean also, in addition to phenomena, we also mean systems, devices, and tools, and combinations thereof. But if you really think about it, this is what we do in engineering and technology. We try to leverage phenomena for useful purposes. Useful is a very important word here because what's useful for someone is not useful for another. And this is where the concept of ethics comes in. So in this very simple definition, you have the technical skills along with the ethical responsibilities. And as part of useful purposes, I should also mention the discovery of new phenomena as well. In 2003, I believe, or two, the National Academy of Engineering published a compilation of accomplishments of engineering for the previous century. It was called A Century of Innovation. That was the 20th century. As you can see, there is a number of important technologies that were developed: electrification, automobile. Pretty much what constitutes modern life was was developed in many different ways in the past century: water supply, electronics, computers, internet, imaging, high performance materials. I think that if you look at what's going on today, in addition to all these fundamental technologies that actually control the present life, our life today, there are many other technologies that have been developing as well. And I will basically want to make an extension of the previous leveraging of phenomena and add that in addition to physics, chemistry, geology, and biology, I think engineers will start also entering a word that includes the human element. And in this case, talking about social and behavioral phenomena. We already see this in many different ways through the importance of data sciences. The fact that artificial intelligence and AI is going to create a tremendous interface between technology and humanity. And engineers and us are going to be asked to play an important role in this, at this interface that becomes importantly more intertwined than ever before. So having this background as a definition of technology and engineering, you can understand almost right away why this is an empowering discipline, because it empowers pretty much all sciences. And as I like to project, it will also empower social and behavioral phenomena as well. The other significant characteristic of technology today, and this is not something that is not new, is that technology increases exponentially fast. It's a very important observation because there are no longer exponential steady states. There are not even steady states in growth. You might say that one can take the derivative of this curve. Let's say here, obviously, these units are arbitrary technology as a function of time. But even if you were to take and extrapolate on a straight line, as many people try to do when the pandemic, for example, started, because the pandemic itself has an exponential nature to it. It's almost like one corresponding to a fixed mindset, and actually typical reaction to change. We see this all the time in politics, sometimes even in academia, in which we try to extrapolate on a straight line to predict the future. However, technology and the world, to a certain extent, is moving exponentially fast. And that requires that we have a mindset of change, a growth mindset, as sometimes people call it. What's characteristic of today's world is that it's a world of knowledge. And I like to make a comment about the qualitative difference between knowledge and materials and energy. Traditionally, we deal with materials and energy, and also a little later and much more recently about knowledge, information, sciences, and the like. And if you consider these three concepts, materials, energy, and knowledge, only the latter, knowledge, has the property that the more you consume it, the more is created. Actually, that's not my own remark. I think I copied it from someplace, but I don't remember where from. And so I just cannot find the particular reference to give it to you. However, this is a very important characteristic that if you think about natural resources, for instance, these are not the ones that control the world today, but it's actually knowledge and the generation of knowledge. I will make a small parenthesis. You know, there is this crisis today between Ukraine and Russia, and the very well-known Israeli historian, Noah Yuval Harari, actually wrote an article in The Economist a couple of days ago, in which he made exactly the same analogy, and say that in the past wars were happening because people wanted to have access to materials or energy or other resources in a different country. Today, this type of mindset has changed dramatically, because the most important thing that that is of value today is the generation of knowledge. And in the case of Harari's, he was puzzled with the fact that we are still in a situation in which the occupation of a different country, let's say an invasion, would have been justified given the fact materials and energy don't play the same role that they used to play in the past. Now, there is a way by which I try to characterize the growth of technology. Clearly, if you put it in exponential, then you have to have some sort of a simple model to explain how technology, let's say, and technology defined in a very vague sense as parameter. I think in this case, I call it A, as a function of time. And if you look at it, you can think of it in terms of a kinetic model, in which case, essentially, it's an autocatalytic reaction. And the higher the speed of technology, increases as proportional to the level of technology, for example, and that obviously gives you Moore's law. But it can be even faster than exponential in the case if the rate of change is proportional to the value of technology. Again, this is all very qualitative, to a certain power which is greater than 1. In this case, you can actually approach a singularity. I'll make it more clear here. Let's assume that you have, the A is an autocatalytic growth, and in this case, you have this exponential increase and you get Moore's law. What I'm trying to say, though, here is that Moore's law is simply one way by which this is manifested. And the actual physical explanation of Moore's law, which means that putting more features in a transistor that doubles every 18 months or so, and people worry about the fact that Moore's law is being met, and soon it will be met, and therefore there will be a slowdown. I am much more optimistic than this, because I believe that this Moore's law simply reflects the fact that technology, the speed of technology, is proportional to the value or to the state of technology itself. We see this development in areas like, as it developed in the area of in Silicon Beach and many other places, Silicon Valley, as well as Silicon Beach is what we have here in Los Angeles, that's how I call it, but also in many different places as well. And if you take quadratic kinetics and you say that it takes the collision of two technologies in order to create a new one, then the rate of change is proportional to a square. It's not difficult to integrate this, and under certain conditions, you can find that the evolution of A is not exponential, but in fact approaches a singularity. So Ray Kurzweil, who is the chief engineer at Google, or used to be, I'm not sure if he continues to be in that, posited some time ago, actually wrote a book called The Singularity is Near, saying that the growth of technology is much faster than exponential. So I have a sort of a simple explanation why this is the case. I actually sent this to Kurzweil. I didn't get an answer from him, but I believe that this explains very simply why one potentially could have a growth that is faster than exponential. I think when we talk about today and we look at the evolution of things like AI and all the corresponding technologies, machine learning and the others that come along with that, it's not it's not a stretch to say that actually we may actually be in a situation that the growth is faster than exponential as well. So it is clear that we live in an era of exponentials, which is kind of unusual for the human nature to understand, because we are much more at ease and comfortable with things that change slowly, because we can make predictions. Clearly, there's a technology. Population has been growing exponentially fast until recently, of course. Of course, now it is projected to stabilize at about 10 billion in the world. But for a number of years, it was exponentially growing. The environment is another case of exponential growth, and the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, as you can see here, in recent years, well, decades, I would say, it has been rising exponentially fast. And I would posit also that COVID-19 also brought an era of exponentials. The epidemic initially starts with an exponential growth, because in many ways it's autocatalytic. The good news is that as you have exponential, many of these, by the way, are unintended consequences of technology. The good news is that exactly because technology is growing exponentially fast, can counter these exponentials that come along in different ways. The most classical example of it is, of course, the development of vaccines for COVID, in which the growth of the development of the vaccine came at record time. It was condensed much more than ever before, and people realized that technology and science can actually provide solutions to all these problems, significant problems that exist in the world today. In this particular case, the pandemic, which appears to be becoming now going towards an endemic situation as well. But the evolution of technology favors convergence. Here, I will give you yet one more example of this. Let's assume you take a different technology, let's say biotechnology, and this can benefit from a different technology, let's say information technology. If you assume that information technology grows exponentially fast, and let's assume that the rate of change of biotechnology is proportional to the particular technology to a power, then you integrate that, you get a different exponential. And this is shown here. This is the cost per omega base of DNA sequencing. And you can see that this is Moore's law, and this is the way by which there was an exponential increase in progress in biotechnology, but with a different, actually faster exponent as well. Again, these are sort of a qualitative arguments to use to try to explain social phenomena in some way. It's actually a very interesting area that I have been interested for quite a while now, on how you can use principles from physics and chemistry in order to be able to understand large-scale social phenomena. And I think there are a lot of similarities, and at the same time, obviously, a lot of differences, and one should not be able to take this too far. What I'm trying to say in many different ways is that the engineering enabling now any disciplines, I call this engineering plus X. Engineering NX could be vectors, that don't have to be simply a scalar here, and X is anything. So this could be media, medicine, entertainment, biology, education. In many ways, engineering sometimes takes a second seat, that definitely in the minds of the public, to science. What I am trying to state in many different ways is that, in fact, that is not an accurate description of what's going on. Many of you are familiar with the following remark that if, let's say, a space mission is successful, it's a triumph of science. And if it is a failure, it's a failure of engineering. And so in many different ways that people look at engineers as sort of a kind of the plumbers, which come in and help you solve problems. But in fact, I think this is much bigger than that, because it is a fundamental enabling discipline that makes things possible that you never thought would be possible before. How is this engineering plus X manifested? I think there are three pathways. One is the engineering enables X and empowers it. We see this very much in pretty much any discipline X through the application of digital technologies. So this is essentially engineering makes X smarter, much more efficient, and so on and so forth. That's actually pretty much the most direct and the most low-hanging fruit, if you wish. There is a converse situation in which X empowers engineering. For example, when we do biomimetic processes, I'm not sure that we have exhausted all possible situations in which engineering can be empowered by perhaps natural phenomena, maybe in biology at large. Certainly, X-mimetic is an important area. We do see this in the case when we try to develop computers that are based on neural networks, as well as the way the brain works. And to some extent, that's biomimetic. But actually, the most interesting work happens when engineering and X commingle. And that is the ideal part of convergence, in which two different disciplines together come in to give rise to what are essentially exponential technologies that essentially change dramatically the state of where we are. So I assume that I have convinced you that convergence is happening, that engineering is the most important part of this convergence. And because it's also exponentially growing, it has tremendous power to make a significant impact across the world. And in this particular case, this is sort of a double helix, if you wish, of E plus X. I have here a schematic of how I can, this is my solar system in which engineering is in the middle. And then around this, let's say I take C as computer science that goes around all kinds of sectors. And these sectors could be or double E or chemical engineering, or can cross natural sciences, medicine, arts, and social sciences as well. And so this is in this particular diagram, I have here areas in natural sciences where engineering can play a bigger role. I made this slide way back in 2010, I believe. I have not updated it since then, but it tries to show you the tremendous impact that this convergence has across the sciences and the disciplines. And in the cases of medicine, you have different departments or different subjects, sciences, arts, social sciences, and so on and so forth. Now, when we talk about convergence, of course, there are cultural issues, and I try to depict this again through a simple potential well situation, because culture wants to be enduring and prevailing. This is from Antonio Damasio, a colleague of mine here at USC, who wrote a wonderful book called The Strange World of Things. Antonio talks a little bit about talks about consciousness as well, understanding, how humans interact and think. And he has this very interesting quotation that culture wants to be enduring and prevailing. I have a simple schematic to show it, in which you can see that there are two different wells corresponding to different cultures, culture A and culture B. And in order to go from culture A to culture B, from one well to another, you have to go through some sort of an activation energy, unless you do some tunneling to be able to go through it. I think that's a challenge that we have across academia in many not only between, let's say, engineering and a different school, or a different discipline, but also obviously within engineering departments themselves. Sometimes, mechanical and electrical and civil and so on and so forth. So that is actually something that has to be overcome in today's world, where things are so fast growing, as well as empowering the very many disciplines. I will see that this actually is going to be the case in the future. And the future could mean perhaps, a couple of years from now, where technologies that come from computer science, such as AI and data sciences and machine learning, have to become part of the curriculum of all our disciplines, whether it's chemical or materials or computer science or electrical engineering. These are techniques and tools that we have to adopt. And in the area of mathematics, we do a lot of it through, of course, the traditional way of calculus and differential equations, which is the traditional classical way by which people like myself have been were able to understand nature. At the same time, we have to understand also that these other technologies are very powerful and have the ability to dramatically change the way technology and engineering is conducted as well. So understanding this convergence of cultures is also very important and should be implemented. I'm now coming to what engineers, why should we be doing what we do as engineers? And a very important part I wanted to mention is the concept of grand challenges or moonshots. And grand challenges or moonshots are essential, important problems that are we think are important to solve in order to engineer a better world for all of us. I will add to this that because technology is powerful, is fast evolving, and is convergent, this allows us to set achievable goals for all humanity. And choosing goals becomes an ethical question. What if you have such power in your hands, or a technology that can be even more powerful, then how you use it is an ethical question. And this is a question that we have to start thinking about. In 2008, the National Academy of Engineering articulated 14 grand challenges. Now you say, why 14? I think the reason was they asked them to put a committee together and asked them to develop 10 grand challenges. Well, they could not come up to an agreement, and they ended up having 14 of them. They can be classified in these 4 buckets: sustainability, security, health, and enriching life. And when actually this is a very useful way to think about how to classify interesting areas and interesting ideas. And these 4 buckets, to some extent, map, and I will use Maslow's hierarchy. Maslow's hierarchy is a psychologist's description of the needs for individuals, and I'll have them over here. For an individual, it involves physiological and health and self-actualization and so on and so forth. I think that these grand challenges are essentially kind of the same thing, but for the planet at large. So when I talk to people and people ask me about what we do in engineering and what kind of problems we address, I always have in mind that to respond to them in terms of these 4 buckets: sustainability, security, health, and enriching life. And pretty much all that we do in our research or as we teach our students, it's not very different from these 4 categories. And I have been trying to, sometimes people say, well, I don't do solar energy, and therefore, why should I be part of sustainability? Well, pretty much everything that one does, whether you develop, let's say, a certain circuit, or you look at a different chemical reaction, they have some sort of a connection to any of these 4 areas as well. But as you probably anticipated, I will make an addendum to these grand challenges, because I believe that, as I mentioned before, that engineers are going to be dealing, and computer science are going to be dealing more and more with behavioral and societal phenomena as well. Through cyber-physical phenomena, data sciences, and as I mentioned, AI, which is going to dramatically change a lot of the things that we do in the world today. By the way, the National Academy, because I have proposed it to them for a number of years, is very reticent to get into this area here because that deals with behaviors and society, and they don't want to so appear that these are trespassing in there. But there is going to be a convergence between the two, and sooner or later, this is going to happen as well. As a result of the grand challenges, when I was articulated in 2008, a number of us, three of us at Duke University, all in college, which was a new college that started back in 2000 in Boston, Massachusetts, and at USC, we created a new program, the Grand Challenges Scholars Program, which, as Andreas mentioned before, received the 2022 National Academy of Engineering Gordon Prize. The idea here is that we asked the question, can we propose a plan for our students that will be generate a generation of students to solve these grand challenges? And we thought that essentially they have to have the following mindsets. I don't call it skills or knowledge, because skills or knowledge change all the time. And I call it mindsets. So these mindsets are to be research and creative, that's the technical part, multidisciplinary in this engineering plus X concept, because all these grand challenges have a multidisciplinary aspect, innovative and entrepreneurial, because without innovation, you cannot have impact. Cultural, because you have to understand how decisions are made in various places, and conscious of the societal impact that it has to have. So this program that started back in 2009 now is adopted by many schools, probably more than 100 schools globally. And as I mentioned, won the 2022 Gordon Prize. These are some pictures from, as a result of this program, we had biannual meetings of the three academies, the National Academy of Engineering, the Royal Academy of England, of the UK, and the Chinese Academy of Engineering. These are pictures from the summit in DC in 2017. These are pictures from the summit in London in 2019. That was the last summit that took place. Just wanted to tell you that this program is very interesting because it attracts a lot of women engineers. And here's a picture of the USC engineering team that participated in this competition. It was an all-women engineering team. Their particular project that they presented had to do with underwater robotics. And this picture here, the reason I have it here is because it's very dear to me, because Alice Gast here, who is the president of Imperial College, was my own student. This was the first student that I had when I went to USC, and I was very happy to see that she obviously now is the president of Imperial College, and she hosted an event on occasion for the program. And this mindset is consistent with the World Economic Forum report because it addresses issues such as creativity, leadership, and perseverance. Many of the things that we need in order to be able to be advanced engineering in today's times. I show you a picture here of the graduates of the class of 2018 at USC of this program. You can see that this is a very diverse and brilliant number of students as well. And we graduate at USC about 50 such students every year in this particular program. Now you say, why the National Academy of Engineering grand challenges? There are many other challenges as well. The UN Sustainable Development Goals. I have them here. Many of them are part of similar to the NAE grand challenges. They talk about, let's say, clean water, solar energy, and so on and so forth. A number of them, however, also involve the human element. For example, zero hunger, quality education, clearly, and many other things as well. And so there is a map between the NAE Grand Challenges and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but not only. I think what you see here is the importance and the inclusion of the human element. And I will say a few words about that in a moment. Actually, I also work with our colleagues at USC on social work and develop grand challenges for social work. Now, these grand challenges are very different than technology. However, there is, again, a convergence. Let me give you some of their grand challenges: individual and family well-being, stop family violence and homelessness, build financial capability for all. So talk a lot of things about society, stronger social fabric, individual and family well-being. You asked the question, how is engineering can be part of this? I think there is a tremendous opportunity for us, particularly in the area of, as I mentioned, understanding and trying to, and data sciences, I think, is probably the most important area here, to try to understand behaviors and then be able to come up with solutions, including technological solutions, that then can be able to address many of these problems as well. Human-centric challenges, I should then give you an example of what we did at USC. There's a class that we developed called Engineering Innovation with focus on human crisis. So this is a civil engineering class. It was developed as a special class. That's why it has the 499 number associated with that. And the specific innovation, the specific class in back in 2018, I believe, was to look at the human crisis in refugee camps. You may not know that, but a number of our students came to Lesbos to visit the Camp Moria. It was very fascinating experience, and not only fascinating, but a life-changing experience for our students. Before they went there, they tried to come up together and say, well, what kind of engineering, technological innovations we need to do in order to be able to help these refugees in the Camp of Moria? And they came up with certain ideas. The most interesting thing is after they visited, because, you know, in order to make sure that your ideas have some merit, you have to look at what in the traditional innovation process is called customer discovery, to try to understand what exactly the customer wants, in this case, the refugees. And they came back completely changed, because what they had in mind, you know, these are American students, you know, that they grew in comfort. Probably many of them never left the US, going into a situation in which there is people live under conditions that are inconceivable to them. Obviously, what ideas they have in order to solve problems is very different than what they encountered when they went there. Interestingly enough, after this class, a number of efforts developed, a number of designs. In fact, there are 2 nonprofit organizations that came out of this, which is still in existence, and is trying to help essentially refugees across the world based on the lessons that they learned. It was one of these very interesting and very life-changing experience for our students. In fact, this problem, I think, became a documentary for public television. So yes, this is the PBS documentary. I can send you the link. It's called Lives, Not Grades. And here is the documentary. Actually, it's going up for an Emmy. And I can tell you that I'm also listed as an executive producer of the documentary, because I provided funding through the Dean's office in order for them to go. And this is essentially the picture that you see. It's a wonderful opportunity for students to understand the plight of others, and also how to solve big human wicked type problems. People say, what are the wicked problems? And I say, whenever the humans involved, problems become wicked. Most of the other problems are solvable. One question about innovation and why innovation. Why is innovation important? Because innovation takes from needs all the way to impact. And this is an iterative process. I have adopted this from the Stanford Biodesign approach, which is how you take, let's say, needs, how do you formulate a statement, and then you iterate until you make it as simple as possible. Then you create research and invention in order to be able to go and address this statement. And finally, you have the impact and the results on this side. And recent grand challenges goals will be based on innovation and entrepreneurship. One important way to do this is to teach fundamentals of innovation. At USC, we have a grant from the National Science Foundation on the I-Core methodology, Innovation Core, which is the lean startup methodology. It's not very complicated. It basically says that in order for you to be able to develop a solution to a problem, you need to understand this part very much, and you have to make this as concrete as simple as possible so that you can focus your effort on understanding what the customer needs. And the customer could be essentially the entity that has a specific grand challenge and requires a solution. After all, innovation is intrinsically convergent because it's a combination of feasibility, viability, you have to have some sort of a business model, and desirability, which is again the customer discovery or culture, and innovation is in the middle of these three areas. Creating competitions among students within an engineering school is actually a very important, a very good thing to be able to enhance this particular mindset, and we do this routinely all the time. Which brings me now to the question, what is the future engineer of 2020? What do I mean by that? Back in 2004, I believe, the National Academies came up with a report called The Engineer of 2020. And it articulated what should be the qualities or the attributes of the graduating engineer of 2020. The engineer of 2020 graduated 2 years ago. And therefore, we need to understand what should be the future engineer of 2020. So here are some thoughts from me. I think that society will increasingly demand purpose and trustworthiness, namely the combination of competence and character. Why trustworthiness? You probably have seen a lot of recent media attention on Facebook and of the way by which companies like Facebook try to essentially lose confidence in the minds of the people about the way they deal with data and technology ethics. Technology, as I mentioned, grows exponentially fast and able to solve big problems, but it can have unintended consequences. I think the reason you have unintended consequences is because in any complex system with many independent degrees of freedom, as any good mathematician will tell you, when the interactions are nonlinear, which happens usually when humans are involved, essentially you're going to get potentially chaotic behavior in which small changes in the initial conditions create large changes in the output. And I think ultimately that's one of the reasons we have unintended consequences. At the same time, we will also ask our students to deal with problems that are human-centric. I can't see how this will be avoided because technology and engineering has tremendous power and a tremendous ability to solve problems. And so for us, it is important to understand how to do this in a human and human-centric setting. All these addresses these are questions that bear a moral responsibility and purpose and character. And I'm just going to leave you with this simple equation, if you wish, that technical competence and character creates trust. Actually, that's not my definition. It was written, many people have said this before, including Steve Covey, who wrote an interesting book on the concept of trust. And you certainly want someone who is technically competent, but also has character in order to be trustworthy. You may have somebody who is very outstanding character, but very little technical competence. Trustworthiness is not there. So I will just have to fast forward a little bit to make sure that time doesn't run out. For course of credibility, is capabilities and results. That's the competent part. Integrity and intent, that's the character part. And the two of them, as I mentioned, create the spirit of trust. So as I go through the development of technology that is exponentially growing, then knowledge and skills become not obsolete, but need to be changed all the time. And that's why I think you need to start thinking about mindsets. Mindsets, the ability of our students to understand that simply taking the specific skills that they graduate with today may not necessarily be the ones that will be useful 5 years from now. And therefore they have to have the mindset, the approach to be able to change that and be constantly in a mindset of change. Finally, I will talk about, conclude this by technology ethics. Whenever you do decisions, and all of us who are many of us who are in academic administration have to make decisions that are essentially at the intersection of three circles. Smart clearly will be, it's important to make decisions as smart as possible. Obviously legal, because there are ramifications if it is not, but certainly ethical as well. Often the intersection of these three circles that do not exist. And so this is the traditional and old Antigone problem. And how do you make decisions that are ethical, but may necessarily be on the smart or the legal part as well? And that is something that we will be dealing more and more in the future, given the fact that technology is so empowering. And so it seems to me that these are things that we have to, in decision-making, that people in our students need to understand it, because useful purposes, the goals that I mentioned, have this ethical characteristic about it. And this is trying to put together in a different way from the perspective of what I mentioned before, that you may start initially some decision-making, which is very nicely at the intersection between smart, ethical, and legal. But then as time goes, then you may have branches that come out. These are the unintended consequences that go towards the smart area, perhaps avoiding the legal part or even the ethical part. And so it's very important to prune, or at least, and this is I think where regulation and politics come in, or legislation, in order to be able to prune these unintended consequences, so that one continues to go through a core that involves this technology to remain in the way it is supposed to have been at the beginning. I finalize with my last two slides is on technology ethics. You probably know all of this, but the synergy of humans with technology, from human-machine interaction to socially assisted robotics, brings all kinds of interesting situations. Autonomy is symbiosis of machines with humans. There's a new term called teaming with AI, which is something that it is going to be an important part of the future. A very interesting new book by Henry Kissinger, and Eric Schmidt of the Google, along with the MIT professor, or dean of the new computing college at MIT, talking about AI, which is actually very worth reading. I recommend it. The impact on human labor and the impact that technology has on income inequality, and also I know many different economists are articulating or arguing for a minimum basic income type of thing. So these are technological impact that needs to be addressed sooner or later. Customization, the risk of the loss of privacy, again, machine learning and AI, reverse engineering the brain, in which probes truly fundamental aspects of what it means to be human. And so does the field of synthetic biology as well. So there are a lot of ethical issues that come in, and it is important for our students to understand that. And so this is something that I have been pushing for a while. Actually, the Engineering Deans Institute, which is the annual meeting of the Engineering Deans in March, about a month from now, I'm chairing a session on what I call educating trustworthy engineers, because they need to understand the ethical aspects of technology. Okay, so this continues changing the conversation about engineering. So this is actually another thing that I would like for you to take is who we are as engineers, what we do, and what we look like. The engineering stereotypes of the white male are changing, and obviously for the good. There's a lot more women in engineering than ever before. In the United States, a lot of underrepresented minority students, Hispanic and Black. And these are things that I think we need to advance and be able to, therefore, have been advocates for such a change. Back in 2015, I started an effort in the American Society of Engineering Education on diversity and inclusion to essentially open the doors for essentially change the conversation about what we do in engineering. Now it's signed by more than 230 schools in the United States. And it is essentially the concept that engineering empowers society. Conversely, society has to empower engineering and therefore be able to have this sort of a way by which the two gears help each other. One of the good things about this, so we actually received the President's Award from the ASWE in 2017. Importantly, I had a chance to visit with the White House back in 2015 and meet with President Obama, who was actually interested in some of the engineering things that I was trying to tell him. My conversation with him lasted 1.5 minutes, but anyway, I did take a picture with him. And I will close by these 5 mindsets of change. I call it hug the exponential. The exponential technology is moving very fast, and we need to be able to follow it, sometimes even lead it. Engineering Plus, change the conversation about engineering, who we are, what we do, and what we look like. And that's a competent part. Along with innovation in the broader sense, because we need to keep innovating and keep changing, creating new markets, new jobs, and also redesign ourselves. Finally, on the character side, cultural awareness, with culture being broadly interpreted to help thrive in today's fast-changing world, and what I call heroic engineering, the awareness of the impact of engineering to society and the importance of technology ethics. So these are essentially the same mindsets for the Grand Challenges Scholars Program, except here I sort of put some slogans to it, from hug the exponential to heroic engineering. Maybe they are more able to catch on, we'll see. So I'm closing by saying that technology, because it's powerful and because it's convergent, can solve humanity's goal, and in the process change the conversation about what we do. I truly believe that we are in a place in history where we can solve so many important problems for the prosperity of everyone. And my final point, I use a quotation from David Deutsch, who is a quantum physicist at Oxford University and wrote a wonderful book called The Beginning of Infinity, in which he says, problems are inevitable, but all problems are solvable. So that's an optimistic view of the world, which I hope that you share with me. And that will be the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Yanni, we cannot applaud, technically speaking. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful talk and for the optimism that's which you close your presentation. Well, I think that the audience will prefer to have part of this discussion in Greek, if there are no technicalities.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
All right. Ερωτήσεις. Έχουμε λίγο χρόνο, νομίζω μισή ώρα. Γιάννη.
You tell me.
Εσύ, το δικό σου το πρόγραμμα. Εμείς μπορούμε να μείνουμε εδώ αρκετή ώρα, μπορούμε να είμαστε πολλοί και θα αντέξουμε. Εσύ δεν ξέρω τι περιορισμούς έχεις, αλλά ας ξεκινήσουμε. Λοιπόν, θα ήθελα να παρακαλέσω, κοιτάζω το chat, κοιτάζω τους participants, βλέπω ότι έχουμε 152 πάνελ και attendees και βλέπω χέρια. Λοιπόν, όπως τα βλέπω, Μαρίνα Πανταζίδου.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ για την ομιλία. Εμένα θα μου επιτρέψετε πρώτα να εκφράσω μια απορία. Πάλεψα να καταλάβω την έννοια convergence και δεν μπόρεσα να την καταλάβω. Καταλαβαίνω τη μετάφραση, ούτε που καταλαβαίνω σε τι βοηθάει. μπορείτε να βοηθήσετε? Αυτή είναι η πρώτη ερώτηση, έχω ακόμα μια, η δεύτερη είναι εύκολη.
Ναι, βέβαια. Αυτό που ήθελα να πω είναι ότι υπάρχει σύγκληση των τεχνολογιών και των διαφόρων περιοχών της μηχανικής και της επιστήμης. Και με τη σύγκληση αυτή εννοώ ότι όπως τα περισσότερα curriculum προγράμματα σπουδών που έχουμε είναι vertical, είναι silos, δηλαδή πας στην μια περιοχή και προχωράς και βγαίνεις από το silo αυτό. Εγώ πιστεύω ότι αυτός ο τρόπος θα πρέπει να αλλάξει σημαντικά και θα πρέπει να γίνει πολύ περισσότερη σύγκληση. Δηλαδή, αυτό το βλέπεις σε πανεπιστήμια τα οποία προσφέρουν αυτή τη δυνατότητα. Νομίζω ότι οι μαθητές οι ίδιοι το κάνουν. Κοιτάξτε, εμείς σαν καθηγητές έχουμε πάρει μια ορισμένη εκπαίδευση σε μια συγκεκριμένη περιοχή και προσπαθούμε να την συντηρήσουμε και να την προχωρήσουμε στην ίδια περιοχή. Πιστεύω ότι το μέλλον δεν θα είναι εκεί. Το μέλλον θα είναι σε μια σύγκληση όλων αυτών των πραγμάτων.
Ίσως να σχολιάσω, αν μου επιτρέπει η Μαρίνα, και ενδεχομένως καταλαβαίνω, ότι αυτό το growth without bound που συνοδεύει το exponential σίγουρα δεν αντιπροσωπεύει σύγκληση, αλλά η σύγκληση νομίζω τώρα είναι σαφές τι εννοεί ο Γιάννης ο Γιόρτσος. It's not in mathematical terms.
Ναι, με συγχωρείτε, δεν είναι σύγκληση μαθηματική. Εάν αυτό εννοήσατε, δεν ήταν αυτή η πρόθεση μου.
Ίσως να μην εννοήσε αυτό η Μαρίνα, αλλά βλέποντας τα exponential growth, κανείς αναρωτιέται πού είναι η σύγκληση.
Μάλιστα. My fault.
Έχω και μια δεύτερη ερώτηση για αυτή το πολύ ωραίο μάθημα που μας περιγράψατε, που πήγε και στη Λέσβο. Κάποιος μας έστειλε τον σύνδεσμο από ένα documentary. Θα ήθελα να έχετε για αυτή την πρωτοβουλία γράψει κάποιο άρθρο σε κάποιο συνέδριο που μπορούμε έτσι ίσως να πάρουμε κάποια κομμάτια από την προσέγγιση σας και να την εφαρμόσουμε κι εμείς κάπως.
Δεν έχω γράψει άρθρο από ό,τι ξέρω, αλλά μπορώ να σας φέρω σε επαφή με τους ανθρώπους που κάνουν το μάθημα και να σας πούν, να μιλήσετε ευχαρίστως και να πάρετε τη σχετική αυτή που κάνουν. Ναι.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Λοιπόν, ευχαριστούμε. Εγώ βλέπω τη σειρά εδώ τον κύριο Ψωμόπουλο, τον κύριο Καβάσιλο και τον κύριο Ιάκυνθο. Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, με τη σειρά που ακούσατε τα ονόματά σας, παρακαλώ να κάνετε τις ερωτήσεις σας. Και όσο γίνεται για την οικονομία της συζήτησης, πιο κοφτές και οι ερωτήσεις και οι απαντήσεις.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, κύριε καθηγητά. Ψωμόπουλος από το Πανεπιστήμιο της Αττικής, στο τμήμα ηλεκτρολόγων και ηλεκτρονικών μηχανικών. Η ερώτηση μου έχει δύο σκέλη. Υπάρχουν πάρα πολλές συνέργειες μεταξύ καθηγητών ελληνικών πανεπιστημίων και πολλών αμερικάνικων πανεπιστημίων, οι οποίες σχετίζονται με αυτούς τους στόχους. Και μιλάω και με την προσωπική μου εμπειρία. Έχω πολύ μεγάλη σχέση με το Κολούμπια και το Τμήμα Μηχανικών Περιβάλλοντος, εδώ και 10 χρόνια. Παρ' όλα αυτά, και σίγουρα δεν είμαι ο μόνος, παρ' όλα αυτά, όλες αυτές οι συνέργειες πάνω σε θέματα που θίξατε δεν μπορούν να το πω έτσι, να γίνουν πραγματικότητα σε ευρύτερες συνεργασίες. Πώς θα μπορούσε αυτή η δράση που ξεκινήσατε, την οποία ενδεχομένως, αν υπάρχουν κάποιοι τρόποι να ενταχθούν και τα δικά μας πανεπιστήμια, να βοηθήσουν ώστε αυτή η πραγματικά πολύ σημαντική, κατά την ταπεινή μου άποψη, προσπάθεια να καρποφορήσει και να πολλαπλασιαστεί και στην Ελλάδα και να αξιοποιηθούν και συνέργειες και να επεκταθούν οι συνεργασίες που υπάρχουν μεταξύ των ιδρυμάτων μας και μέσα από αυτή την πραγματικά πολύ σπουδαία πρωτοβουλία του Πολυτεχνείου για να έρθουν κοντά όλες οι πολυτεχνικές σχολές. Αυτό θα ήθελα να σας ρωτήσω. Πώς θα μπορούσε αυτό να γίνει?
Κοιτάξτε, μιλάμε για δύο διαφορετικά πράγματα ίσως. Το ένα είναι undergraduate education και το δεύτερο είναι research, I suppose. Εντάξει. Αυτά τα δύο είναι σχετικά, αν και υπάρχει μια σχέση μεταξύ τους προφανώς, ανταλλαγή φοιτητών στο undergraduate level. Έχουμε επίσης, είναι μια σημαντική, είναι προφανώς μια λύση. προγράμματα, πώς το λένε, συνεργασία μεταξύ της National Science Foundation της Αμερικής και της αντίστοιχης ελληνικής αρχής, θα ήταν πάρα πολύ καλή ιδέα. Οπότε να μπορέσουν να επεκτείνουν προγράμματα τα οποία να ενθαρρύνουν προγράμματα τα οποία να χρηματοδοτούνται από το National Science Foundation. Το National Science Foundation στην Αμερική έχει τέτοια προγράμματα με το Ισραήλ, παραδείγματος χάρη. Θα μπορούσε κάλλιστα να γίνει κάτι και με την Ελλάδα, από ό,τι φαντάζομαι.
Και με την Πορτογαλία, αν μου επιτρέπεις, Γιάννη. Και με την Πορτογαλία, συμπληρώνω.
Με την Πορτογαλία, okay. Στην περίπτωση των προπτυχιακών, αυτό που θα ήθελα να σας πω, ότι το δικό μου το πανεπιστήμιο έχουμε ένα πρόγραμμα το οποίο λέγεται iPodia. iPodia είναι, προσφέρουμε μάθημα το οποίο γίνεται ταυτόχρονα σε άλλα πανεπιστήμια, μπορεί να το πάρουν μαθητές από άλλα πανεπιστήμια. Δηλαδή δεν είναι κοινό μάθημα. Στην Αμερική, παραδείγματος χάρη, θα πρέπει να είναι στις 8 ώρα το πρωί. Στην Ελλάδα θα ήταν 8 και 10, 18, 6 ώρα το απόγευμα. Το μάθημα αυτό παίρνεται ταυτόχρονα μέσω του ίντερνετ από διάφορους μαθητές, από τους μαθητές από τα διάφορα σχολεία. Οπότε προσφέρει την δυνατότητα στους μαθητές να μπορέσουν να πάρουν μαζί το ίδιο μάθημα. Αυτό το πρόγραμμα το έχουμε από το 2011. Υπάρχουν περίπου 10 ή 12 πανεπιστήμια στον κόσμο στο οποίο το προσφέρουμε. Είναι, παραδείγματος χάρη, Tsinghua University στην Κίνα, είναι το Technion στο Ισραήλ, είναι το Aachen στην Γερμανία. Νομίζω ότι φέτος είχαμε και μια παρουσία από το Πανεπιστήμιο της Πάτρας σε αυτό το πρόγραμμα. Πολύ ευχαρίστως να το κάνουμε αυτό το πράγμα, αν θέλετε. Αυτό βέβαια σημαίνει ότι οι μαθητές που θα το παίρνανε από την Ελλάδα θα πρέπει να παίρνανε credit για το γεγονός ότι παίρνουν αυτό το μάθημα. Πάντως αυτό το μάθημα μπορεί να πάρθει. Δηλαδή τώρα με το γεγονός ότι το COVID βοήθησε πάρα πολύ όλο τον κόσμο να μπορεί να επικοινωνεί με το ίντερνετ in a different way than before, νομίζω ότι αυτό προσφέρει καινούργιες δυνατότητες και πολύ ευχαριστώς να συζητήσουμε πώς μπορούμε να κάνουμε τέτοια πράγματα. Εγώ πιστεύω ότι επίσης μια ανάπτυξη σχέσεων της Αμερικάνικης National Academy of Engineering με την Ακαδημία των Αθηνών θα πρέπει να γίνει. Και βέβαια δεν ξέρω, η Ακαδημία των Αθηνών είναι λίγο... δεν έχει τόσο πολλούς μηχανικούς, ίσως έχει τις δικές της ιδιαιτερότητες, αλλά ίσως μέσω των... Εάν όλοι στην Ελλάδα, οι Πρυτάνοι στις πολυτεχνικές σχολές οι Κοσμητόρων αποφασίσουν να κάνουν κάποια τέτοια προσπάθεια, νομίζω θα ήταν καλή.
Εύχομαι, Γιάννη, σε μια μελλοντική ομιλία σου να βάλεις και μια υποσημείωση σε κάποιο slide ότι κάτι τέτοιο πείραμα ξεκίνησε και στην Ελλάδα. Μετά αυτά που μας λες και θα μας βοηθήσει βεβαίως. Λοιπόν, ο κύριος Καβάσαρης και ο κύριος Σιάκηδος. Πέτρο.
Ήθελα να σας ευχαριστήσω για αυτή την πλήρη νεωτεριστική ομιλία και σκέψη για το ρόλο του μηχανικού στη σύγχρονη κοινωνία και να σας κάνω την εξής ερώτηση. Καταλαβαίνω πολύ καλά ότι αυτή η τάση του faster than exponential growth και η λογική του να λάβουμε πολλές παραμέτρους υπόψη όταν κάνουμε engineering design, legal, ethical, δημιουργεί νέα δεδομένα. Ποια είναι η επιχείρηση, κατά τη γνώμη σας, η οργανωσιακή μορφή που μπορεί να απαντήσει σε αυτές τις προκλήσεις? Το ρωτώ γιατί κάθε εποχή έχει τη δική της επιχείρηση. Η εποχή των τρένων και των σιδηροδρόμων και των τηλεπικοινωνιών είχε τη μεγάλη επιχείρηση. Μετά, αργότερα, τελευταία, το flexible specialization που έχει περιγράψει πολύ ωραία ο Πιόρε, είχε άλλες άλλες επιχειρηματικές αλλαγές. Ποια είναι αυτή η επιχείρηση? Και τέλος πάντων, οι μεγάλες επιχειρήσεις που βλέπουμε τώρα, Amazon, Google, Facebook, είναι μια απάντηση, είναι η απάντηση σε αυτή την ανάγκη? Είναι τελικά μήπως συνδέονται με αυτή την τεχνολογική επιταγή?
Δύσκολη ερώτηση. Θα απαντήσω με Amazon, με απάντηση σχετικά με το Amazon, Google κτλ. Δεν υπάρχει αμφιβολία ότι ειδικά Google ξεκίνησε με μια πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα πρόταση, έτσι, η οποία ήταν πώς να μαζέψει την πληροφορία και να την κάνει κοινή για όλους. Amazon ήταν περισσότερο a business model, παρά ας πούμε a technological thing, αλλά πήρανε, πώς το λένε, they took advantage of the fact that technology was growing fast. Pluses and minuses. Without Amazon and without their ability to come in during the pandemic to be able to help people, you know, we would have been in a much worse shape than we are. Is Amazon offering something important to solving big problems? I'm not so sure. I think many of these companies democratize access, and so I think that is something that's very important for the world. Do they put energy and emphasis in solving big moonshot problems? I am not sure. I think that foundations of people like the Gates Foundation and others who can do, who have tremendous resources, they can possibly facilitate or push forward in that direction. Στην Αμερική δεν ξέρω, και στην Ελλάδα φαντάζομαι υπάρχει μια διαφορετική. Αυτό που βλέπω είναι ότι οι φοιτητές μας, the Gen Z, Generation Z, έτσι λέγονται, η δική μου generation είναι στο άλλο άκρο, έχουν πολύ περισσότερες προθέσεις to change the world, save the world κατά κάποιο τρόπο. Είναι πολύ περισσότερο ιδεαλιστές, νομίζω, από ότι ήταν άλλες γενναίες πριν από αυτούς. We may see something different. Δεν ξέρω αν στην Ελλάδα συμβαίνει αυτό ή όχι, αλλά το βλέπω πάρα πολύ στην Αμερική. Είναι πολύ κοινό φαινόμενο. Ίσως έχει σχέση να κάνει με το climate change. Το γεγονός ότι βλέπουν ότι θέλουν να αλλάξουν την κοινωνία, όπως προφανώς όλοι μας όταν είμαστε σε αυτή την ηλικία. Στην ερώτησή σας, υπάρχει ένα new corporate model. Δεν μπορώ να πω ότι έχω δει κάτι τέτοιο, να σας πω την αλήθεια, που θα μπορούσε να κάνει αυτή την αλλαγή.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Να προχωρήσουμε για να μην δώσουμε προνομιακή μεταχείριση στους panelists. Θα κρατήσουμε και κάποιες ερωτήσεις, χώρο για ερωτήσεις από το Q&A session και παρακαλώ την κυρία Μακρινού όσο γίνεται να τις ομαδοποιήσει για να γίνει πιο οικονομική η αντιμετώπιση τους, τον κύριο Ιάκυνθο, την κυρία Παυλάτη, τον κύριο Αβούρη μετά. Κύριο, σε ακούμε.
Ναι, καταρχήν ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ, αγαπητέ Γιάννη. Επίτρεψε να σου λέω Γιάννη ως συνάδελφο, έτσι, του θεωρώ τιμή, έτσι, για την ομιλία που έκανες. Μ' άρεσε διότι ήταν ανθρωποκεντρική, κοινωνικοκεντρική. Έβαλες μέσα διαστάσεις ψυχολογίας, κοινωνιολογίας, αυτό που ενδιαφέρει τους μηχανικούς. Για τη σύγκληση, εκεί μου άρεσε, για τη σύγκληση. Εγώ το είδα, ξέρεις, ως μαθηματικό μοντέλο, ως μαθηματικά. Συγκλείουν όλα, θέλουμε να συγκλείουμε έτσι ώστε να μπορέσουμε να έχουμε το μέγιστο impact, το μέγιστο benefit για την κοινωνία και τον άνθρωπο. Μένα μου άρεσε αυτό το πράγμα και επέτρεψε μου να καλώ κάποια σημεία της ομιλίας όταν θα μιλάω στους φοιτητές μου. Θέλω να ρωτήσω το εξής. Επειδή είπες κάτι πολύ ωραίο στη δευτερολογία σου μετά τις ερωτήσεις, που είπες ότι έχουμε μάθει εμείς ως καθηγητές ένα συγκεκριμένο τρόπο, πάθαμε μια συγκεκριμένη τεχνολογία, την αναπτύσσουμε, τη διδάσκουμε χρόνια τώρα. Εγώ κάνω μηχανική ρευστών, έχουμε μείνει στα γνωστά και στα ίδια κτλ. Και στην Ελλάδα δημιουργείται ακριβώς μία, το βλέπουν όλοι οι συναδελφοί, μία τάση να εξυγχρονίζουμε τα προγράμματα σπουδών. Και αυτό οδηγεί πολλές φορές στο να πηγαίνουμε σε νέες τεχνολογίες, οι οποίες είναι πιο advanced και μεταξύ μας εδώ που τα λέμε τώρα πιο πολλές από την Αμερική που έρχονται στην Ελλάδα και τις κάνουμε copy. Εντάξει, έτσι είναι. Η Ευρώπη λιγάκι αργεί σε αυτά τα πράγματα. Αλλά δεν κοιτάμε την ανθρωποκεντρικότητα και τις συνέργειες και όλα αυτά τα οποία θα κάνουν ένα καλύτερο κόσμο. Τα παιδιά όντως θέλουν αυτό το πράγμα, το βλέπω και εγώ στα παιδιά. Ας πούμε, όταν τους λέω για το Space Race, δεν ενδιαφέρονται καθόλου. Δεν δίνουν καμία σημασία τι είχε γίνει τότε το Space Race. Αλλά ενδιαφέρονται για το κλίμα, για το περιβάλλον, για την αειφορία. Ήθελα να σας ρωτήσω, στο δικό σου ίδρυμα, στην Καλιφόρνια, εκεί πέρα, προφανώς έχετε αλλάξει προγράμματα σπουδών. Αυτό εδώ πέρα το πράγμα, πώς το περάσατε μεταξύ των συναδέλφων, να δούμε δηλαδή το best practice και πώς καταφέρατε να έχετε και συνέργεια στα προγράμματα σπουδών μεταξύ των γνωστικών αντικειμένων, αλλά να δώσετε και μια ανθρωποκεντρική έτσι, θεώρηση, κοινωνικοκεντρική θεώρηση, θα μας βοηθήσει πάρα πολύ να δούμε και εμείς που προβαίνουμε σε αλλαγές για να περάσουμε κάποια μηνύματα.
Αυτό που θα έλεγα και αυτό που είναι διαφορετικό και δεν ξέρω πώς πώς θα μπορέσει να αλλάξει για την ελληνική κατάσταση, σίγουρα για το Πολυτεχνείο, είναι ότι πανεπιστήμια στο το δικό μου το πανεπιστήμιο στο University of Southern California, USC, έχει 20 schools. Έχουμε law, social work, medicine, pharmacy, dentistry, arts, cinema, you name it. Οπότε υπάρχει ένα οικοσύστημα στο οποίο η ανταλλαγή πληροφοριών και the ecosystem encourages the interaction between these various people. Νομίζω το πιο βασικό από όλα είναι να δημιουργηθούν τέτοιες καταστάσεις ή circumstances in which you have a very close collaboration and a very close meetings, a very close coming together with many people from outside your own discipline. The moment you do this, you realize the connections that exist, and if there is obviously effort from both sides, then you can make a big difference. At USC, we started back in 6 years ago a Center for AI in Society, and this was a partnership with computer science and the School of Social Work, and it's a very close partnership. A partnership on how to solve problems like homelessness. Homelessness is a big problem in the United States, as you know. How do you solve this problem? How you try to understand and see how you can solve this problem? So, and I think this is fundamental. And I think politics do not understand this. I think the number of engineers in the US Congress are like 1 or 2. Out of 300, whatever. Okay. Και νομίζω και στην Ελλάδα κατά κάποιο τρόπο συμβαίνει το ίδιο πράγμα. Νομίζω ότι μερικοί άνθρωποι θα ήταν πολύ καλό ώστε όταν λέμε μια τεχνοκρατική κυβέρνηση να είναι a good thing και όχι not a bad thing. Γιατί συνήθως το τεχνοκρατική είναι κάποιοι άνθρωποι οι οποίοι έχουν μόνο some sort of the optimal solution, very narrow, without looking at the bigger picture. Νομίζω ότι εκεί πρέπει να αρχίσουμε to have some impact.
Ευχαριστώ, Γιάννη, και ευχαριστεί και η Πολυτεχνική Σχολή του ΑΠ. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Ευχαριστώ.
Παρακαλώ.
Κυρία Παυλάτου και ο κύριος Σαβούρης μετά.
Ναι, γεια σας. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ για αυτή την πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα παρουσίαση, κύριε Γιόρτσο. Θα συνεχίσω με τον προηγούμενο που ρώτησε και αφορά κυρίως τα προγράμματα σπουδών. Δηλαδή, στο πρόγραμμα σπουδών, πέρα το ότι γίνεται μία όπως είπατε εσείς, incorporation με άλλες, για παράδειγμα, disciplines, όπως είπατε, κοινωνιολογία, ηθική, νομική ή οτιδήποτε άλλο. Αυτό σημαίνει ότι προφανώς αυτά τα μαθήματα εμπεριέχονται μέσα στο πρόγραμμα σπουδών, αλλά φτάνει μόνο αυτό? Ή αντίστοιχα artificial intelligence, για παράδειγμα, που είπατε, ή μπορούμε για να το κάνουμε, θα έλεγα, πιο κοινωνικοκεντρικό το πρόγραμμα σπουδών, να υπάρχουν και project όπως αυτά που είπατε πριν, δηλαδή που μας αναφέρετε με τη Λέσβος και λοιπά, έτσι ώστε να υπάρχει ένα project που είναι ένα problem solving και πάνω σε αυτό να δουλεύουν όλες οι διαφορετικές αυτές επιστήμες μαζί. Είναι ένα πολύ βασικό ερώτημα, γιατί πιστεύω ότι πέρα από τη θεματική ενότητα που πρέπει να έχει ένα πρόγραμμα σπουδών, πρέπει να έχει και μια αντίστοιχα διδακτική μεθοδολογία. Οπότε, από τη δικιά σας εμπειρία, τι προτείνετε πάνω σε αυτό?
Αυτό που έχω δει και θα γίνει ακόμα πιο έντονο, νομίζω, after COVID, είναι το γεγονός ότι the outside the curriculum activities become more and more important. Και με αυτό εννοώ student groups, student projects, things that students that don't go to the classroom simply listen to the professor, then take notes, and then they go home and they take the test and they pass the test and everybody's happy. I think the more hands-on, whether it is research, with undergraduate research, whether it's a specific project, and many things outside the curriculum. We have so many groups at USC that, and I'm sure it is true in many other universities as well, that deal with all kinds of different topics, and they're interested in, for example, I'll give you a very simple example of a and this has nothing to do with human-centric problems, but it has to do with the rocket propulsion. We have a rocket propulsion team. They create the rocket themselves. It's a solid propulsion. They are extremely talented. They put all the electronics, everything in there. It's a group of about 100 students. And then they go in the desert and they launch this to space. Actually, the particular group broke the Kármán line, which is the first student rocket to reach the space, which is 100 kilometers up in space. And this is done with the support of the faculty, but it's actually the students that take all this initiative. Now, with respect to courses like the one that I mentioned, with the visit to Lesbos, I very much encourage this, because this is how students learn. And this is how students develop a community. They develop leadership, they develop all these other skills, they develop empathy. Empathy στα αμερικάνικα, στα ελληνικά σημαίνει sympathy, δεν είναι empathy, είναι το αντίθετο. And they are able, therefore, to relate. I'm sure there are all kinds of interesting problems that in Greece that one can work on that as well.
Κύριε Αβούρη, και μετά τον κύριο Αβούρη θα περάσω σε ερωτήσεις που έχει ομαδοποιήσει η κυρία Μακρινού και είναι το Q&A, Γιάννη, και θα πάρεις χαρτί και μολύβι να σημειώνεις κάποιες ερωτήσεις και θα τις πω έτσι ομαδικά.
I have 5 minutes left, Andrea.
Εγώ ήθελα να ρωτήσω παρόμοια που ρώτησαν οι δύο προηγούμενοι. Ήθελα απλώς να κάνω ένα σχόλιο. Ήταν βαθιά, deeply optimistic this talk, και εγώ έχω κάποια reservations, γιατί αυτό το exponential technology development που παρατηρούμε δεν αντιστοιχεί σε exponential change στα πολυτεχνία τα δικά μας, τουλάχιστον από όσο αντιλαμβάνομαι. Είμαστε πολύ πιο αργοί, και ειδικά κάποιοι από εμάς που έχουν και την ευθύνη των αλλαγών, γι' αυτό και οι προηγούμενοι που ρώτησαν οι συνάδελφοι, συμμερίζομαι απόλυτα τις δυσκολίες. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, κύριε Γιόρτσο, για την ομιλία. Πράγματι θα μας δώσετε την άδεια να τη χρησιμοποιήσουμε στους συναδέλφους και στους φοιτητές μας, τώρα που ξανασχεδιάζουμε συνεχώς τα καρίκουλα και τις σχολές μας. Και να πω ένα τελευταίο για τον Αντρέα τον Μπουντουβή, τον πρίτανή μας του Πολυτεχνείου. Εδώ να σημειώσουμε την ευκαιρία αυτής της θαυμάσιας ομιλίας. Έφερε κοντά τα πολυτεχνία της χώρας και τις πολυτεχνικές σχολές, και πραγματικά τον ευχαριστούμε γι' αυτό. Και όπως του έχουμε πει και ιδιαίτερα, και με την ευκαιρία της ομιλίας αυτής που ακουμπάει ένα πολύ κεντρικό θέμα για όλους μας, την εκπαίδευση των μηχανικών και πώς πρέπει να αλλάξουμε σε έναν κόσμο που αλλάζει τόσο γρήγορα, να ερχόμαστε πιο κοντά, πιο συχνά, και με τόσο distinguished speakers όπως είναι ο Professor Yortsos, να βοηθήσουμε τη χώρα και τα πολυτεχνία μας, γιατί έχουμε στα χέρια μας τα καλύτερα παιδιά. Ξέρετε, με τις Πανελλήνιες έρχονται τα καλύτερα παιδιά, έρχονται στα δικά μας σχολεία, στα πολυτεχνία. Και νομίζω ότι δεν είμαστε πάντα αντάξει των παιδιών που έρχονται κοντά μας. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, κύριε καθηγητά.
Ευχαριστώ και εγώ. Θα ήθελα να σας πω ότι η ποιότητα των Ελληνών φοιτητών είναι προφανώς τρομερή, φανταστική, καταπληκτική, και συμφωνώ απόλυτα ότι it's up to us to make sure that they get the education they deserve. Absolutely.
Νίκο, σε ευχαριστώ για το σχόλιο σου, και δεν θα πω ότι η φράση είναι δέσμευση, γιατί είναι παρεξηγημένη, αλλά θα προσπαθήσω να βρεθούμε οργανωμένα όλοι μαζί για να μπορέσουμε να οργανώσουμε και τέτοια πράγματα, αλλά και πολλά άλλα.
Λοιπόν, Αντρέα, το περιμένουμε από σένα. Ναι.
Ωραία, δεσμεύομαι. Λοιπόν, αγαπητέ Γιάννη, θα σου πω μερικές ερωτήσεις, όπως αυτές έχουν έρθει από το Q&A. Σημείωσε παρακαλώ, θα κάνω μια επιλογή, γιατί ο χρόνος είναι περιορισμένος για τον ομιλητή μας. Do you see a need for changing the classification to traditional disciplines within engineering? For example, chemical, mechanical, electrical, etc., to more broad classifications, also with respect to the engineer of the future as you described him?
Η απάντηση μου αυτή τη στιγμή είναι όχι. Δηλαδή πιστεύω ότι κατά κάποιο τρόπο οι περισσότερες από αυτές τις επιστήμες, τεχνολογίες, ξεκινάνε από μια συγκεκριμένη science, in chemistry, biology, physics, and so on and so forth. So I don't think you need to do this at this point. However, you want to make sure that people that graduate with a, let's say, chemical engineering degree have all the most recent tools and abilities that you can get from other disciplines as well. I think that's really what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you should change. I think chemical engineers will be needed and mechanical engineers will be needed. And so will be aerospace engineers. I don't think the convergence is at that level is such that you have to abolish these things. No, I don't think, I'm not saying that.
Μια ερώτηση είναι η εξής. We know that the distance between those who know and understand engineering and technology capabilities, mainly engineers and natural scientists, and the other disciplines constantly and probably exponentially increases. So this is the statement, and the question is, so it would be interesting to also extend such a course in the curricula of other disciplines, e.g. economics or humanities. Are you trying to do, I suppose he means in your place, to do something like this, that is to let engineering enter the other disciplines?
So I will actually argue about this statement. Maybe it's true in Greece, I'm not sure, but in the States, so I'll give you an example from my own school. About a month ago, all the deans of the various schools got together, and the question was, how do you see the future of your discipline? So that I was talking to a group of deans from medicine, pharmacy, dentistry, and others as well. Business. Almost invariably, pretty much everyone says because technology is going to dramatically change our disciplines. So they have been a complete awareness of the fact that they have to include the understanding of technology and engineering in their disciplines. And so they are very much actually aware of that. Now, so I personally, for example, believe that medicine, with small exception, will become an engineering discipline in not too long into the future. Because if you think about, other than the human sort of a comfort state thing, which most of the time is provided by nurses or is provided by, let's say, people with whom you have an emotional attachment. Everything else is not very different than what we do in engineering. It's pharmaceuticals, the discovery, that can be, it is diagnosis, that's becoming increasingly an engineering or technology thing, and surgery, that also is becoming increasingly technologically driven. So that convergence is happening in front of our eyes, and the most successful medical schools are the ones that are going to have a very strong engineering background. I know that the University of Illinois, the medical school there is very much engineering oriented, and so is a new engineering school, a medical school at Texas A&M. I think that a close collaboration of the universities, the Πολυτεχνία στην Ελλάδα, with the corresponding medical schools is a necessity. It's important, and actually it should be happening more and more than ever before. I think that's the closest thing, because it brings together the health part of these buckets that I mentioned before. I think that's a natural to me.
Γιάννη, πόσο χρόνο έχεις ακόμα διαθέσιμο για μας?
-1.
-1. Λοιπόν, θα αναγκαστούμε να το τερματίσουμε εδώ. Θέλω να σας ευχαριστήσω πάρα πολύ, και αυτή είναι η αρχή της αλληλεπίδρασής μας, και θα έχουμε συνέχεια. Άλλωστε εσύ επισκέπτεσαι την Ελλάδα και ξέρεις και τα του Πολυτεχνείου αρκετά καλά. Να σημειώσω ότι πρόσφατα ήσουν σε μια επιτροπή από αυτές που έκαναν πιστοποίηση σε σχολή του Πολυτεχνείου, οπότε ξέρεις how do we look like, στα δικά σου τα μάτια, που μας ξέρεις και από παλιά. Ήθελα μόνο μια ανακοίνωση για την ομίγυρη να κάνω, ότι στις 25 Φεβρουαρίου θα οργανώνει το MEP ένα άλλο webinar, το οποίο έχει τον εξής τίτλο, και μάλιστα εθίγει και αυτό στην ομιλία του Γιάννη, Robotics in the AI Era, Opportunities for Innovation in Greece. Είναι στο LinkedIn του NTUA, θα διαφημιστεί όταν πλησιάζουν οι μέρες πολύ συστηματικότερα, και θα σταλεί σε όλους, κυρίως απευθύνεται σε φοιτητές, προπτυχιακούς, μεταπτυχιακούς και νέους ερευνητές. Stay tuned. 25 Φεβρουαρίου. Λοιπόν, ευχαριστούμε. Ζητώ συγγνώμη, ήταν αδύνατο να κάνουμε accommodate όλες τις ερωτήσεις. Να είμαστε καλά, θα τα ξαναπούμε. Γιάννη, σε ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Να είσαι καλά.
Εγώ ευχαριστώ.
Και καλή αντάμωση.
Γεια σας. Γεια σας. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ. Στη τιμή μου να
Ευχαριστούμε.
Ευχαριστούμε. Συγχαρητήρια.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ.